Welcome to today's episode of the Sweet Divorce Podcast. I'm Rosario Santoyo, and this is my partner.
I'm Gretel Smith.
Today we're going to talk about helping your children cope with separation.
You know, there's so many different types of separation, right? Like when in our realm, when we were working with children who are separating, it's typically because parents are getting divorced or separated. And so it's how do we help that client navigate two households with their child? But, you know, in our everyday life, we also deal with our own children with separation issues. It could be separating from the grandparents, separating from a friend that might not be the best, healthiest relationship for our children. There's so many things that, you know, when we're working in our daily lives, that this can go for everything.
It's really just helping your child help them get through struggles of life in general.
Absolutely.
And life has plenty of struggles. There are so many wonderful things about life, but part of life is also learning how to cope with challenges. And that can even go for something as simple as going from one school to another school after graduating. That's something that no one can control, that you have to do just because that's the next sequence of events. And it could be traumatizing if kids think of the change. The unknown is really what the scary part is.
Right.
So helping kids cope with not only separation of parents, but with struggles of life in general and with the transitions in life.
Right. And really honestly focusing on that unknown and maybe helping your children figure out tools to work with the unknown.
We both have kids.
Yes.
So they've had their own transitions and changes. Yours in particular has had a lot of changes in the past couple of years. You want to talk about?
And so during the pandemic, he would have been in preschool, in daycare or preschool, and he would have been going into TK, but because TK was virtual at that time, it was going to be so hard. So we opted to keep him home, which was quite a struggle from his normal daycare that he had been in full time, and then going back to school for him, going into kindergarten after everything had been locked down there was a transition, and that was absolutely difficult. And I know a lot of parents had that problem. And I'm sure parents whose children went to school in 2021, 2022 for the first time experienced the ups and downs of we're in school, we're virtual, we're in school, we're virtual. It was like it felt like, at one point it was almost every other week. We didn't know where we were. But then also recently we made a move from the Bay Area back down here to San Diego. And that was a huge transition because our son, had to leave the school that he went to for kindergarten and most of first grade, and then start for the last part of first grade and second grade at a whole new school with people he's never met. And that was just a different type of transition, and working on getting him comfortable and feeling happy where he's at. It's not always easy.
So what did you do to help him? Now that they know he went through so many transitions. You
said
that he went from having a TK, having a preschool, to having to stay at home all day. And then he went from one community of San Francisco to a different community of San Diego. So how did you help him understand the purpose, I guess?
Right.
And
so one of the things we, obviously going from staying home to kindergarten, that was a much easier transition, I think, for him, because he'd already been in daycare and he wasn't so young and removed from that environment to be scared to death of being with a bunch of other children. He had luckily had that opportunity and that experience. So kindergarten transition was a lot easier. We just talked about, what would kindergarten look like, toured the school, we toured the room, we met with the teacher ahead of time. And we had the advantage of knowing some of the children that were actually going into his kindergarten class. We had enrolled in some martial arts and some other extracurricular activities that he got to meet some of his classmates ahead of time. Also, his school at the time offered a camp, which was wonderful, a summer camp beforehand. So he really got to know the teachers, the students of the school before he went in. So it wasn't as unknown for him at that point. Going forward, fast forwarding into first grade, he had 3 teachers in his first year. Within 3 months, one of the teachers quit after the first day, and then they had a substitute. They had temporary teachers essentially in and out, which was a lot of change. And we noticed it was very difficult for him. And it can be for any child's going to be difficult having to go through such a change. And the entire class was having those issues too. And so just talking to our son and explaining, that this is just a season. and that eventually, things will even out, and just trying to keep things very regimented at home. So at least, even though at school during his days, he didn't always know what was going to happen Monday through Friday, he knew when he would get home, this is what we do. We have this time as a family, we do this, and then we have dinner, and we have bath time, and we have reading, and then we go to sleep. So just keeping a schedule at home so that there's something steady in his life, and then talking about his concerns and things that are happening. The move down to San Diego had been talked about for a while, so that was something he knew about. And luckily, we have very strong relationships up in the Bay Area, and we have strong relationships down here in San Diego. And so we have friends here that he was friends with as well, with children that he's friends with. And so we made it, every time we would come down to visit to look at houses, we included visits with our friends with kids to make sure that he could establish some relationships, even if they weren't going to school. And then we just talked about, what would the new school look like? We went on a tour of the new school. We met the teacher ahead of time, and it was a really much easier transition. And I think part of that is just going into a school that was very well established versus what we were up in the Bay Area. But again, even with those changes, we kept our routines the same. So we always had the same routines. We always get up around the same time. We have the breakfast. We chat in the morning. We have a schedule. And by keeping that schedule in the mornings and the evenings, I think that helps the most with the transition. That was very long-winded, but
no, not at all.
You said there's been a lot of transitions.
Yes.
And then just moving forward, and I think every summer we have a transition too. That summer break is for some kids, it's so much harder than others. And, if you have a neurodivergent child, you throw that into the mix, now you really have to add some additional support and tools to their tool belt to kind of help with that. We found that keeping the schedule the same at home really does help with that transition.
So it sounds like you're providing stability with the things that you're able to control, and that's providing him so that not everything in his life is changing.
Right.
And that helps with the adapting to the new situation.
You did such a good job of summarizing that. Yes. That's exactly what I was trying to say, that I said in 1,000 words.
Well, you gave examples. You gave examples of what your experiences were. So I also had, my kids go through some transitions going from one school to another school. And what I tried to do to help them was opening up that conversation so that they always had somebody that they could share their feelings with and touch base with, because you don't want your child to feel like their feelings aren't valid.
Right.
So even if it is scary, even if they're afraid of what the change may bring, validate that and allow them to tell you how they feel. But also a lot of how they respond to change is whether or not they have somebody that they can trust to share those feelings with. So no matter the change, I think that one of the most important things you can do is to make sure that your specific relationship with your child is one of trust and is one of listening and respect, so that your child knows, no matter what happens, at least I know that, at bedtime, mom is going to ask me how I feel, and I'm going to be able to get that off of my chest and feel better about it afterwards. So at bedtime, I would talk to them about their feelings and what was going to happen, and they still shared, well, I'm nervous because of this. I'm afraid that I won't be able to make new friends, or what if my teacher isn't nice? Things like that. And then, depending on the day or depending on how nervous they felt, we could say, well, you'll always have the friends that you have now. We're not moving anywhere. We can still reach out. You play with them on the computer. You play with them, we have play dates at the park. So even if, worst case scenario, there was not one kind person at the school, which we would address if that was the case, you would not be losing the friends that you had, the good relationships that you had. But also, like I said, they were able to share that with me and anybody because they trusted their feelings with me. So whether it's divorce or moving or starting at a new school or starting a new school year, just making sure that your children always know that they have somebody that they can confide in, that they can communicate with, and that they can trust with their feelings. That helps tremendously because it kind of gives them the confidence to face whatever challenge life may bring.
I absolutely agree. And, I like how you also and we kind of did the same thing, is try to maintain relationships outside of the school area, or like even from the Bay Area, we still try to maintain those friendships that my son made, just to give him that sense of stability. And, you know, in divorce, I think, or separation, it is so important to, even though, you know, both parents may be separating, you're going to be in two different households, maintaining some sense of stability. And that can look like when they're at mom's house, mom can have a schedule with the children, and at dad's house, dad can have his own set of schedules. Both parents don't have to have the exact same stability, right? For example, and I don't know, in my household, I parent a little differently than my husband does. And so, but my child knows that if dad's doing bedtime, this is how dad does it. If mom's doing bedtime, this is how mom does it. And so if when you separate, you can keep that continuity as well. And understand that, you know, maybe the other parent isn't going to do things exactly the same way as you do, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. As long as your children aren't getting harmed. Because sometimes kids are going to say, mommy, daddy did it this way, or daddy, mommy did it this way.
Yes.
Right? And so instead of saying, oh, I can't believe he did that, it's how you react, because your children are going to feed off of that. And if you can say, oh, well, that sounds like a fun experience. How fun is that to do that with daddy? Here, we're going to do it this way. Right? Rather than say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you do that, and then start texting, and your kid's going to feed off that energy, and it's going to make that transition so much harder for your child. So it's really just like you said, validating your children, okaying things that are happening that might be a little different too.
Right.
And saying that it's all right. Things, you know.
I was going to say, don't use your child as like a juror.
Right.
You know, pardon me. It's not a good thing for the child's transition to think, okay, now I have to judge whether mommy's way is better or daddy's way is better.
No.
Because that's not the position of the child. You have to encourage as much as possible the relationship between both parents. And like Gretel mentioned, that's what the parameters of safety. As long as your child is safe in both households, then each parent is allowed to parent the way they want. Mm-hmm. And the standard is not the other parent has to be perfect. The standard is the child cannot be harmed as a result of negligence or, you know, abuse, right. Violence, anger. That's the standard. So no one's parenting style is necessarily perfect, but you have to also know that you need to encourage the child, your baby, to say, okay, you know, this is my dad and I love him, and it's important for them to know that you still care about the other parent as the parent of your child. They feed off of that too, and I know that's the hardest thing. It's hard to say when it's come to separating from the other parent, it's hard to still respect them as a person in the same way that you did when you chose to marry that person and think it was forever. But as much as you can, keep any negative feelings, any cause of your separation out of the ears of your child, because they are part the other parent. Nobody has a baby on their own.
I mean, even if you do have a baby on your own, if there's two adults in the household, that's still a parental relationship. And I think that's something that you just said, because that kid's going to internalize that, oh, my parent just said that parent over there is bad. Does that mean part of me is bad? And that sounds really silly, but that's what our children do, right? Their brains aren't developed, they're developing.
Yep. And
that just leads me to another thing. When we are separating, it's so important to validate your love for your child, because sometimes our kids, whether they're neurotypical, neurodivergent, a change is going to cause them to maybe lose their temper. They're going to act out a little bit of sorts. They're going to, maybe they don't want to pick up the room when you say it before they used to pick up their room. Something is going to change with them. And you need to make sure that no matter what your child is going through, that they understand that you're going to love them unconditionally. That there is no conditions to the love of a parent. And if you do put those conditions on that child, they're going to feed off of that immediately. And it's going to harm them, especially in this transition.
Also verbalize that it's not your child's fault that you're separating from the other parent, because sometimes they could feel, like, oh gosh, I got daddy mad that time that I did this, and what if it's my fault that they argued and now they're not together anymore? And that's the way their brains work. So it's important to support support them, support their feelings, and also let them know this isn't because of you. Sometimes adults don't get along anymore. We're both grateful that we have you together. However, it didn't work out, but that doesn't change that I love you or that your dad loves you,
Right.
for example. The other parent loves you. So make sure that they're not feeling any guilt as a result of your separation with your other, the other parent, with the other party.
Absolutely. And, I wouldn't even say it as a last resort. If you and your former partner find that your children are having a hard time with the transition, therapists are fabulous. And whether it's going to a family therapist, whether it's finding an individual therapist for your child, somebody to help your child with that transition. Because sometimes, as parents, we're not perfect and we may not be able to fix everything with our kids. We want to, but we might not be able to. And so I would say that, when you're facing something as major as a separation from your partner or your other parent, seek out a therapist for your child so that they have somebody that's a third party that's never going to judge them, that they can talk to.
Yes. And that could also help your relationship with your child because they'll be able to express what might be lacking.
Exactly.
Mom got really mad at me when I didn't finish my eggs this morning or something like that. And, even if it seems like it's the heat of the moment and you're trying to rush kids out the door, little things like that can stay with them and you might not even realize unless they share that with somebody else. So it's a nice way to give them another sounding board, but also let you peek into how you look as a parent to your own children.
And sometimes, again, with an individual therapist for your child, they can help you kind of, like you said, you get a different perspective, but then maybe in your own individual therapy, work on how to change that perspective so that your child's not seeing you in that light. Because again, going through a transition like a separation is so difficult and emotionally just a horrible time for people. And so you're grieving the end of your relationship and your child, you're also trying to parent your child. And so not only do you not want that to fall onto your kids' shoulders, you also, you don't want to do permanent damage.
Yeah, that's always the goal.
That is the goal, right? Like, how do we
not mess them up too much.
Absolutely. There's a lot of really great books out there on transitioning and separation. So we're going to link some books that, we think might be good for you to gift your children, maybe read to them while you're in the process of separation. Both parents don't have to sit down with the children to do that, but just let the other parent know, hey, we're going to read this book. There might be some questions. And then also a couple of books that would be good for, parents that are separating, for the parents to read and just ways to talk. So those will be linked in the description.
With that,
yeah.
Do you have anything else to add? I think that's really the best solution is to find professional help.
That's always you should always have that as as part of the plan, right? Professional help is part of the plan, but also, like you said, being a person that they can trust and that they can confide in, and trying not to judge, because those are the three things that our children need: is no judgment, to be able to confide, and trust.
And keep them out of the divorce. They're not a party to the action, even though they're affected by it. Make sure that they know it doesn't really have anything to do with anything they did, and that no matter what, both parents still love them.
Absolutely.
If you or a loved one is going through a divorce, please feel free to reach out to us for a consultation. And that information is also going to be in the description box.
Until next time,
Life is sweeter after divorce. Let us help you get there.